If you're buying beauty products because they're labeled clean, sustainable, or responsible, you deserve to know if that claim is actually true. Because a lot of brands talk the talk. But can they prove it? In this conversation, Melory Johnson from Pretty Equity explains why sustainable beauty matters and what brands need to have in place behind the scenes.
So, thank you for joining us, Melory Johnson from Pretty Equity Insights. And tell us more about your work. What are you doing in the beauty industry and your experience with it?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to chat with you. Okay, so Pretty Equity is a resource platform, first and foremost. So it's there for educational purposes. Everything that's on there is just free to grab, mostly for founders and investors who are, just wanting to understand more about the industry. I'm finding that, as time is going by, we're getting a lot of investors coming in from other industries, like tech, or non-beauty industries. And then they're not really understanding exactly how regulated the beauty industry is or what constitutes the beauty industry, because it goes beyond just cosmetics. Medical devices are becoming a big part of the beauty industry, especially today with all the new red light devices that you're starting to see, and both in-home, as well as in doctor's office use medical devices. So, aesthetics and injectables, those are also part of, the beauty umbrella. So there's a lot that's covered, within beauty. So the platform is there. Like I said, I do execution, resources, educational resources, understanding, formulation, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, my interview series, which I do as well for YouTube, Spotify, and then mostly on Substack, where I will do exactly what we're doing now. I will interview an expert in the field, and we'll talk about subjects that are important to founders, particularly people who are looking to start brands, indies, startups, new founders, so that they can understand what they're getting themselves into. There are landmines. They don't know where these landmines are. And yes, regulatory and compliance are a big part of what I do, which I know we're going to be talking more about. But that's it. Prettyequity.com is where you can find all the resources you're looking for. And then again, like I said, LinkedIn, Substack, YouTube, just put in Pretty Equity and you'll find me. Not hard.
Yeah, it's not hard. Yes, true. So, Melory, you mentioned you're working with founders, of course. What has changed in the beauty industry? We know that there's a huge push towards transparency. Sustainability is another aspect that is, upcoming. But we see all this trend with social media influencing choices. But as an expert who is guiding new startups in the beauty space, what is the one thing that you're seeing is an upcoming trend within the whole cosmetic and beauty space when it comes to consumer preferences?
You know what? Okay, so it's interesting. There's been a lot of change in the way consumers view the market since COVID. What I found was that with all the isolation over COVID, people took the opportunity, maybe out of boredom, I don't know, to actually start doing a little research into what it is that they're putting on their skin. And you started to see a trend toward, wanting more education, wanting to understand ingredients. And so fast forward 5 years, and you have consumers who are really much more savvy and much smarter at understanding, cosmetics ingredients than they used to be. It was never a thing where you would have 12 and 13-year-olds understanding and wanting skincare and skincare regimens, or hearing people use terms like longevity, or use terms, or have people understand the nuances of skincare. Before, it was just a matter of, we want shampoo, buy shampoo, we're done, right? As long as I like the way it smells, maybe, or as long as it foams up. Now people understand foam doesn't always equal clean, right? Now they understand that there's different kinds of ingredients that do different things. You hear the words peptides thrown around everywhere today. That's still a big trend. Even though you're starting to hear people going more toward and again, on the longevity conversation, going more toward things like, the NAD plus, the PDRNs. You're starting to hear those floating around. But I think we're going to get to a point where consumers are going to start understanding that a formulation isn't just about the ingredient. A formulation is it's architecture. It's an entire system. You need your preservative system within that architecture. You need your delivery systems within that architecture. You need to understand, that peptides are not a thing. There are many, many things. So what are we trying to achieve? And that, you're starting to see, and you're starting to actually see that trend now in the way new founders are building their beauty products. They're starting to build products toward, and they're aiming at something. They have a goal, and it's not just this broad anti-aging anymore. People are like really looking at what can we do so that we can stay younger longer, or that we can keep ourselves from becoming older for longer, right? Extending our beauty lifespan. So it's just very interesting, and I think that the way consumers are looking at it is very interesting. But I don't think that the trend toward wanting to know more and wanting to be more educated is going to change. You know what I mean? I think that consumers are now expecting so much more from their cosmetics, that just because it smells good or just because it feels good is not going to be good enough for much longer. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
Oh no, absolutely. Yeah, I do agree. If I may ask you, Melory, are there any choices for consumers to look at these particular preferences behind? Of course, scanning ingredient lists, going to EWG databases. People are, they have come a long way. Now, transparency has increased. Scrutiny for brands is increased. Any names you want to drop over there so that consumers know which brands to look at? Probably because you're an expert, you've seen that.
Oh no, I will get myself into lots of hot water if I start throwing names of brands around. But sure. There's definitely look, I mean, the trend toward the doctors brands started earlier, using the idea that there's a doctor behind the brand as a form of marketing.
Yeah.
Really and truly, because a lot of those brands, they might have a doctor's name attached, but there really isn't a doctor per se in any of it other than the name. But I think that consumers now are, I think they're starting to see beyond that. I think that it is still important that there is something about that brand that they trust, whether it's a doctor story or another story. But I think that consumers are also looking around at things like reviews, at things like what are their friends using, at things like and that's where influencers and and the whole social media network becomes so vital to marketing, is because consumers, they want to know what's being said about those products. They want to know, like, they're not buying the I put this on yesterday and today I'm 5 years younger. They're not buying that anymore, right? So they want to know,
yes.
Like, what's really going on behind the scenes? What are people really saying? And so you're starting to see a lot of podcasters and TikTokers who are doing things like that. They're taking brands and they're literally ripping them apart because they want to. You need to be able to stand up to that scrutiny. Can you stand up to your claims? Can you stand up? And I think that's what consumers want to see now. You know what I mean? It's not just who's the hot brand today. You know what I mean? It's like, what is going on behind the scenes with that brand. I want to know that. I want to know, is what they're saying real? Is what they're saying, and that whole debacle with the SPF, and the SPF testing and all those, those in Australia, the Australian government are coming down hard on SPF testing in particular. Consumers, they read this, they're seeing this, and they're starting to question now, what's going on behind the scenes.
It's true, and yes, the SPF scandal that took place, I think it was last year. I did do a video of the ultraviolet and naked Sundays when they failed their testings, and that brings me to this question of the regulatory space. We have regulators, there are watchdogs also over there, who are watch groups doing their work. Choice being one of them, which took the SPF scandal. They exposed how ultraviolet and naked Sundays failed in their SPF testing. Do you think there is an increased role of regulators now? People are reading those reports. It's helping them. I mean, podcasting and YouTube social media is one part of the thing, but has the workload of the regulators increased to ensure that they're bringing out transparent information for consumers?
I think they're trying. The thing is that in the US, with the with MOCRA, the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act, which really only was passed by Congress in 2022, and then became law in 2024. We're in 2026 now. It's been a very, very short time. But if you look at the trends in Europe, right, it's inevitable that the US is going to follow suit, because what's going on in Europe is going to start happening here. And you can see, there's a lot more movement from a regulatory standpoint in Europe. They're much faster and it will happen here. So, I mean, is it happening now? I don't know for sure that the FDA has the bandwidth to really do the kind of work that they want to do. I think they're still hoping that brands will try to do the right thing. I am seeing more and more disciplinary actions being taken lately. Especially if you go back and you do a search of say warning letters over the last 24 months. You'll see there really has been an increase in warning letters. And I think that, look, all of it, the entire purpose of everything, the FDA, the FTC, who also governs beauty, from a marketing standpoint, all of it is to protect the consumer health, right? The FDA exists because it is protecting the public health, right? And in the end, for all of us in this industry, we should all have that exact same aim in mind, right? Yes, do we want to make money? Sure, of course, we're here to make, to be in business, right? We're not creating for no reason whatsoever. But at the same time, we can do well by doing good. And I think that's the idea behind these regulators, is just not to be the teacher in the classroom, shaking their finger at you, but rather to be just saying, look, we left this voluntary for so many years. It really became the Wild West and people were getting hurt. So now we have to crack down. I mean, 1938 is when the FD&C Act was passed. And that was based off of a, lash lure in 1933, I think it was lash lure that created an eyeliner that blinded women, and someone actually died. And that was what, brought about the FD&C Act and what put the FDA basically in charge of cosmetics, because they realized that people were not taking cosmetics seriously. Now, I think that with the regulations coming from MOCRA, and there's a lot still coming, there's a lot that's been done in these 2 years. Do you know what I mean? It is actually quite impressive all the regulations that have been passed in the last couple of years, and then those that are still coming, like the GMP compliance, the GMP regulations, and the fragrance, the fragrance allergen warning, all of those regulations that are coming down the pipelines. But all of this is following the trend of Europe. And I think for brands, I think it's going to make brands better. I think it's going to make us all better, because in the end, who's putting in the complaint to the FDA? It's the consumer. Who's putting in the complaint to the FTC that they were sold something that it isn't what they thought it would be, right? It's the consumer. Where does the lawsuit come from? It comes from the consumer. Whether it's a class action or civil lawsuit, whatever it is, it's coming from the consumer. So as long as we all take care of the consumer is happy, the consumer buys our product, and we're all going to be able to grow as an industry and as companies, and as, we'll all do, well by doing good for the consumer. So, yes, I think regulation will be helping.
Yeah, that's so on point, and I do agree with you. Melory, doing good, it's been an ethos of most brands in this current day and age. Since I come from a sustainability background, and I've been covering, sustainability of beauty industry, public health is one part. Have you ever encountered that kind of same gusto with which sustainability is brought to the fore? It's coming to the fore, and people are talking about it, and they're taking brands also, holding brands accountable. Have you seen that kind of thing moving in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Would you like to share something? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said before, what's going on in Europe, the US will follow suit, and sustainability is becoming a big, a big play in Europe. So yes, it's going to follow here in the US. But you're seeing that. I mean, you started seeing that with the clean movement. You started seeing that with, it never became law per se. It never became regulation per se. But do I think it will? I do think it will. I think there will come a time where that will become part of, we will follow the EU's trend. But, the consumers, like in the end, like I said, the consumer is the person who's keeping companies going, because they're the ones buying your brand, right? There is a trend from a consumer standpoint toward sustainability, because people want to know, where are you getting that shea butter? I read an article about shea butter, and it's made me nervous about, where are you guys getting your shea butter? And so, so these are the kinds of things. It started off with, remember the whole leaping bunny. I mean, not that leaping bunny has become irrelevant, it's still pretty much there. But the idea was, we heard that they test, cosmetics on animals, and that's horrific. And absolutely. And because the consumers no longer wanted that, things had to change. And now consumers want to be able to see the leaping bunny, symbol on packaging, or they want to be able to see some kind of a sustainability symbol, on packaging, which now in the EU, we're going to start seeing that becoming a requirement. But I do believe it'll start showing up here, because I think consumers do want it. I think it's important. It's important to know that people are not being abused to make your product. You know what I mean? That we understand. And again, it all comes down to, to procurement. What does your supply chain look like? Do you know what I mean? Have you got control over your supply chain? Do you know what I mean? I know you're getting your ingredients. Your ingredients are coming in from your contract manufacturer, from your CM, right? But have you seen the CFAs, the COAs, on the suppliers at your CM? You know what I mean? These are kinds of things that are important, because if you want to be able to say to a consumer, we are this as a brand, right? We're sustainable, we're clean, we're whatever it is that you want to claim, that's as much of a claim that you have to substantiate as saying we can make you look younger in 2 weeks. Do you know what I'm saying? you have to be able to prove it. And the only way you can do that is by having control over your supply chain. And at least having a really, really good look at who is on your supply chain and where does it start. So yeah, I think sustainability is important, and I think it's going to remain that way for at least the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I totally see that trend also coming. And you mentioned a very important point that it can be part of regulation, because right now sustainability has moved into a voluntary disclosure kind of a thing. Companies do it because they want to be sustainable. It's there. It helps consumers make better choices. It gives a value to the consumer to make a differentiated choice out of all those products over there. Melory, because you touched on regulation, you're a regulatory expert also, and you touched on regulations. I wanted to ask you, next 5 years, what kind of regulatory trends do you foresee coming up within the beauty space?
Okay, so like I had mentioned to you before, the US seems to follow the EU, right? Those seem to be the trends. And I'm actually just pulled up some notes here, if you don't mind me. I jotted down a few points I wanted to bring up on, regarding this so that I wouldn't forget. So as we discussed, MOCRA in the US was the inflection point, right? So we've seen things like facility registration, product listing, adverse event reporting. And like I mentioned, we have, the GMP, regulations coming down the line, and fragrance allergen disclosures, right? But I think the globe, not just the US, there's going to be global convergence toward the EU model, right? But it's going to be patchy, because what I think the other thing people don't understand is, in the United States, each state is governed, there's federal law like MOCRA, right? But each state has its own state laws. So that's why I'm saying it's patchy. It's like this whole patchwork system. You know what I mean? It's not harmonized. But I do think that it's going to, the trend will be that we're going to start seeing things close in. These gaps are going to start to close. You see it with PFAS, and some of the other things that we're seeing. It's going to start, closing in. And the state that follows EU closest, California. What's happening in California is also starting to make its way around the country. So what are the next trends? I can't tell you for sure what I think will be the next trends, but I do know that things are moving fast, and that we do need to keep our eyes open. Who saw a new SPF being, released by the FDA, being approved by the FDA? Who saw that coming? You know what I mean? That one, it's been decades since we had a new one. I want to see somebody do something on the color realm. See when we can release a new color. Because it's been a long time coming since we because the United States is extremely strict when it comes to color additives. Much more so than the rest of the world. But that would be interesting to me.
More than the EU. Sorry. More than the EU also.
Oh yeah. With color additives, yes. The United States, yeah, they're definitely. The US is much more restrictive on how they deal with color additives, it is something that I would love to see someone tackle. The problem lands in how they're going to go about doing that, because that would require an entire FDA toxicology change. The same way as we stopped testing on animals for many of our cosmetic, almost all cosmetic products. Color additives are treated differently. They're not treated the same way as your regular, non-monographed, actives. So, toxicology there still requires animal testing. So that is the barrier. But I would love to see someone tackle that. I would love to see someone take that down, because I do think I think it can happen. I think there are enough predicates, in Europe and elsewhere to be able to say, we can use this as our predicate, and we do not require animal testing because of these things. But colors a conversation for another day. We can certainly have that conversation, but but it is that to me would be very interesting. That would be very, very interesting. But as far as what trends are coming down the pipelines for regulation, I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell you that specifically, but just I do know as far as keep an eye on what goes on in Europe, because chances are it's going to be going on over here.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, no one can foresee the future. We're not all soothsayers, but I did see this gap. With the EU, especially since you mentioned color additives, I wanted to mention that fragrance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fragrance is something which is big over there now. With the EU having all this mandating that disclosures on what kind of ingredients you're putting up has to be there behind the label. It's not seen in the US. We had that whole Dove episode, of Lilial still being marketed despite having adverse health implications for many of the consumers. And it was I was amazed. Even Nigeria had to recall Dove and US didn't recall. They were still using Lilial behind the products. So there's this big gap, and I totally agree. It's a patchwork of laws working somewhere. Probably the EU has one uniformity.
Yes.
The US also needs to take that. So it's a patchwork. Yeah.
I think MOCRO was the first step in that direction.
Based on that, I wanted to... sorry, you were saying?
No, I was just saying I agree with you completely, and I think MOCRO is the first step in that harmonization. But it is still too patchy. It's too much of a quilt. We need to, But like I said, I do believe MOCRO is a step in the right direction. And like I said, you can see it already just with the things that have come down the pipelines. But yeah, carry on. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask, with all this going on, you have clients, new brands coming up. How can new brands which are focusing on more niche needs of consumers be aware of such regulations and work in such an environment where they, don't fall off the cliff also, and they're able to fulfill the needs of the consumers? So what will be your 2 cents to the brands out there which want to make something big?
Okay. The one thing I would say is you don't go it alone. You cannot go it alone. You have to make sure that you have, number one, you've chosen the right R&D team, because not all chemists are the same. You know what I mean? Just because somebody calls themselves a cosmetics chemist doesn't mean that they are not like I said, not you know what I mean? Not everyone understands the world the same way. And you're going to get some people who are just motivated by getting the work, so will say yes to anything, right? And then you'll get others who are really chemists worth their salt, and they're the ones who are going to be pushing back. They're going to give you better ideas. They're going to tell you to try something else. They're going to give you the reasons for why. We had mentioned, NAD plus and PDRN earlier. Another example is collagen. Why a really, really good chemist will say, these are the reasons why this is not a good idea. Are these valuable scientific ingredients? Do they have a value in terms of longevity? Yes, they do. But you need to have somebody who's going to explain delivery systems to you, who's going to explain, ingredient sensitivity to you. Because, somebody who's just going to say yes to everything, you're going to land up with a product that has a great ingredient list, You know what I'm saying? It has it's a lovely looking formula on paper, but it doesn't work. It doesn't do a thing. And maybe it feels good because it has collagen in it, but anybody who's been doing this long enough knows collagen is just too large a molecule to be absorbed into the skin. It doesn't matter what delivery system you use. It's just too big. You know what I mean? It's better to take it, in your food, or as an oral supplement. But that's number one. Find the right chemist and find the right R&D team. Don't just go for somebody who says yes to you. And the other is regulation. Make sure you have a regulatory affairs team on your side. You don't have to hire them. They don't have to be part of your in-house team, right? You can get consultants. You can even just get advisors, people who can advise you and point you in the right direction as you need it. A lot of CMs have regulatory affairs options as part of their services. You know what I mean? If you're going to be using them, find somebody who can do some double checking, right? It's always good to have a second pair of eyes on something, Don't just rely on AI. I know there are a lot of AI systems out there now that you can use, from a regulatory standpoint. But honestly, this is one of those situations where you need human eyes on it. And it's not hard to find really good, consulting firms or individual consultants, just hook up with people on LinkedIn, see the kinds of things that people post, see the kinds of, and follow people. And there's another great way of finding the right person for you, because, you might find that you have a very limited budget and you have only so much to spend. That's okay. That's okay. There are the right people for every job, but make sure you do not go it alone. Don't get your formula from an AI. An AI cannot tell you the kinds of nuances that a good chemist would know, and don't trust your regulatory to an AI. You know what I mean? I know it's cheaper, and I know it seems, a better way to go. But honestly, if you're an investor or if you are a founder, those are the two things that are going to make or break your brand. So, yeah, that would be my advice.
Choosing a better marketing team?
Yeah, look, I think marketing teams need to be trained. I mean, okay, so marketing is another conversation completely. And so the thing is okay, so let's say you got a great formula, you got a great chemist, you've got a great contract manufacturer, you've got a great RA team, quality team, regulatory team, and you've got this beautiful product. You know what I mean? Everything lines up. You want to put it out to the world, sell your product, and down, here's where everything goes wrong. Because chances are your marketing and even your PD, your product development team, are not always trained in regulation or compliance, right? They know the gist of it, but not all of them are trained in, FTC law, Federal Trade Commission law, because that's part of marketing. You have to understand FTC law in order to sell in the United States. You have to understand FDA law in order to sell in the US, right? Because, you're even if you are going D2C. And then you also need to understand that you can't hide behind a platform. So in other words, if you want to sell on Amazon and Amazon accept your product and Amazon accept your marketing, right? That does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that it is compliant and that you are following law, following regulation. You can't hide behind the platform. You can't hide behind your influencer. If you give a content creator a brief, here's my product, here's what I want you to say about my product, that content creator is a content creator. They create content. They can use your brief to make the basis, but in the end, they're going to say whatever they want to say, right? Because they want more views and they want more clicks and they want more likes, right? And they want to be able to say they sold your product, right? But that's how you land up with an FTC violation because they did not disclose that this was a paid. It didn't, you know what I mean? They didn't go to Sephora, buy the product themselves, and then decide out of the blue that they want to advertise it without your knowledge, right? No, this came from you. You gave them the product. You gifted them the product. You asked them to talk about the product, right? So there's a whole lot of FTC violations that can happen right there. And who is going to report you to the FTC? The consumer, right? So now you've got this beautiful product out there. All of a sudden, your cosmetics being spoken about as if it were a drug. The FDA are coming down on you. The FTC are coming down on you because, your advertising wasn't disclosed. You know what I mean? Somebody got hurt because they used it incorrectly because they followed an influencer's advice, and the influencer wasn't using it on label. They were using it off label, right? They were using it, a great example, back to color additives. They could be using a color, right, that's not approved by the FDA for use around the eye. They're using this instead of on the cheeks, they're using it on their eyes. Somebody gets an eye infection or gets, some kind of an eye issue. And that comes back to the brand. Everything comes back to the brand. Even if the brand had on their container, on their box, not to be used around the eye area, the consumer's not going to be looking at that. They're going to be looking at what the influencer is doing, right? They're going to copy what they see. They're not going to read the fine print on the back of the box. So you could be fully compliant, but in the end, all of this washes back on you as the brand. You own all of it. You own every word that's spoken by someone who's not you. You own every like on Instagram. You own, you know what I'm saying? And it becomes really hard to keep up. So unless the entire marketing chain is educated, right? Your own team is educated so that they can give a compliant brief to the influencer. The influencer or content creator, the podcaster, the MD, it doesn't matter, whoever's representing your brand is trained, you know what I'm saying? And they're fully trained and they understand what to do with that brief and what can and cannot be said about the product. You know what I'm saying? If that chain is not trained and is broken somewhere along the line, the consumer in the end is either going to come back at you with a lawsuit, come back at you with an FTC, complaint, or come back at you with an FDA complaint. And, none of those things are something that I would want to be dealing with if I were a brand. So yes, I think it's got to come down to educating, and marketing is the place where things tend to break down. No matter how much work and how much money and time you put in on the front end, once it goes out, you know what I mean, into the market, that's where things can really fall apart, because that's where you lose control.
Yeah. True words of wisdom, Melory. I do understand. Yeah, no, absolutely, because that's a practical guidance, coming out from years of seeing how brands falter at every step. I have seen many brands doing that, and then they vanish out just because they added those labels and gave it up on Instagram. Influencers were involved, and then the lawsuits came up, right? We've seen that, and I think many brand founders are still falling into that trap. So, just wanted to also ask,
Yeah. So, I couldn't agree with you more. It's terrifying. That's the part that I think is most nail biting for brands, is just to see how you've made this beautiful product, you've done everything right.
Yeah.
And then, like you say, you put it out there, because you want people to know. And how else are you going to get people to know if it's not through, one of these influencer agencies, or, direct through an influencer, whoever it is, that you've chosen.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's the blowback's coming.
Absolutely.
And in the end, though, the saddest part is that it's nobody's fault, Arjun. It's nobody's fault. It's just that nobody's been educated. No one's been trained. So, yes, that will change too.
So how do brands get in touch with you, Melory, and use your...
They can easily find me, reach me on LinkedIn. They can just DM me or connect with me on LinkedIn. Or you can go onto prettyequity.com and you can contact me there. Just email me at, like you said, insights@prettyequity. It's pretty easy to reach me. I'm pretty vocal on LinkedIn. I'm pretty, out there, so anyone can just drop in and find me.
And you have a Substack also.
I do. I have a Substack also. In fact, I just dropped another article, a second half of my conversation with Wayne Plant. So, my Substacks are 99% Q&A. So it's me having a conversation with an expert, asking questions that founders and their investors would need to know in order to avoid the landmines. And whether it's in regulation, quality, formulation, it's there. When Plant and I were talking about delivery systems. So I just dropped the second half of our conversation today. So you can catch those there as well. We did talk about what's available on the market today in terms of delivery systems. We understand that formula needs delivery, but, how does that affect the brand? Because how does a brand know what to choose? So that was the kind of conversations that we were having. And so I actually just dropped that one this morning. So check it out on Substack, on Pretty Equity on Substack. And you'll find it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Melory. It was a wonderful session of conversations and learnings also for me. And I hope we continue this. There are many other things we need to discuss, but I think there's paucity of time. So let's park it for another time.
Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you for inviting me, Arjun.
Thank you.